What if I told you the voice that destroys your confidence every single day is not your truth, but your history repeating itself inside your head? You hear it in silence. You hear it before sleep. You hear it when you try something new. It does not shout like an enemy. It sounds familiar, almost like your own thinking. That is why it wins. Because you never questioned it. You assumed anything inside your mind must belong to you. But what if that assumption is the reason you have been holding yourself back for years without even realizing it? What if the real limitation is not your ability, not your effort, but the internal voice you learned to trust without verification? And if that is true, then the most important question of your life is not what you want to achieve, but who is speaking inside you when you decide you cannot. This voice did not appear randomly. It was built slowly, over time, in moments you did not even register as important. A comment from someone you respected, a reaction you received when you made a mistake, a comparison you felt but never spoke about, a silence when you expected encouragement. Piece by piece, your mind started recording patterns, not to hurt you, but to protect you. At first, it was useful. It helped you avoid embarrassment. It helped you fit in. It helped you stay safe in environments where mistakes had emotional cost. But what once protected you eventually became something that limits you, because a protective voice never updates itself unless you challenge it, and most people never do. They grow older, but their inner dialogue stays frozen at an earlier version of reality, and here is where it becomes dangerous. The voice does not just comment on your actions, it predicts your future. It tells you what will fail before you try. It calculates outcomes based on your past, not your potential. So every time you think about doing something slightly outside your comfort zone, it immediately shows you a version of failure that feels real enough to stop you. Not because it knows the truth, but because it remembers your history more clearly than your courage. And over time, you stop separating prediction from truth. You start treating mental simulation as reality. You feel fear, and you assume fear is information. You feel doubt, and you assume doubt is wisdom. But what if fear is not intelligence at all? What if it is just repetition? There is a moment most people miss, a moment when the voice speaks, and you agree without noticing the agreement. You do not argue. You do not investigate. You just comply internally. You delay the action. You shrink the idea. You adjust the goal, and because nothing dramatic happens in that moment, you never register it as a turning point, but it is. That is the moment your life changes direction quietly, not through failure, but through hesitation that felt reasonable at the time. And when this pattern repeats enough times, you start building a life that is not defined by what you cannot do, but by what you never fully attempted. Carl Jung observed something similar in his work with people struggling with inner conflict. He noticed that the mind often carries internal voices that feel like truth, but are actually inherited patterns of judgment. Not always from parents in a literal sense, but from early environments, authority figures, and emotional conditioning. He described how these internal authorities become so integrated that people no longer question them. They feel like identity. But Jung also pointed out something important. Anything inside you that goes unchallenged for long enough will start presenting itself as your personality, even if it began as influence from outside. And this is where people get stuck. They confuse repetition with identity. They confuse familiarity with truth. And if you are hearing this and feeling uncomfortable, there is a reason for that. Because part of you already knows this voice is not always fair. You have seen moments where you did something well, but immediately dismissed it. You have achieved things, but mentally minimized them. You have survived situations you thought would break you. But your internal voice moved the goalpost immediately after. It never allows completion. It only allows evaluation. And evaluation without recognition becomes emotional exhaustion. That is why even successful people sometimes feel like they are not doing enough. Not because reality says so, but because the internal narrator never stops adjusting the standard. And here is where the shift begins, not by silencing the voice, but by noticing it as separate from you. The first time you realize this is a thought, not a fact, something subtle changes. There is a small gap between impulse and belief. In that gap, choice appears. Most people never enter that gap. They live fused with their thoughts, reacting instantly, believing instantly, obeying instantly. But the moment you create even a slight distance, you begin to see patterns. You notice how predictable the voice is. You notice how it repeats the same arguments in different situations. You notice how it always leans toward limitation, never expansion. And the most interesting part is this. The voice becomes weaker, not when you fight it, but when you stop treating it as authority. Because authority requires belief. The moment belief is removed, it loses control. It can still speak, but it cannot decide anymore. It becomes background noise instead of direction. And in that shift, something else starts to grow. A quieter sense of clarity. Not loud confidence, not forced positivity, just clarity. The ability to see a situation without immediate internal distortion. And that clarity is what most people are actually searching for when they say they want confidence. There will be resistance to this, because the voice will not leave quietly. It will adapt. It will tell you that ignoring it is dangerous. It will pretend to be responsibility. It will sound like realism. It will use your past mistakes as evidence. It will say it is trying to protect you again. And in a way, it believes that. But protection based on outdated information is still limitation, and you have to decide whether you are going to live under old protection or current possibility. That decision does not happen once. It happens every time you hesitate, every time you doubt, every time you almost act and then stop. And somewhere in this process, you start noticing something else. The voice is loudest right before change, right before growth, right before action that matters. Not during failure, but during potential. That is a pattern worth remembering, because it means the voice is not reacting to danger. It is reacting to expansion. It does not appear when you are stuck. It appears when you are about to leave stuckness. And once you see that pattern clearly, it becomes harder to fully trust it in the same way again. This does not mean you eliminate fear. It means you stop confusing fear with instruction. Fear can exist without being followed. Doubt can appear without being obeyed. Thoughts can arise without becoming identity. And that separation is where real change begins. Because your life does not change when your thoughts disappear. Your life changes when your thoughts lose control over your actions. And when that starts happening, you may feel something unusual. Not immediate confidence, but space. Mental space. Emotional space. The sense that you are no longer completely inside every thought that passes through you. That space is uncomfortable at first because you are not used to it. But it is also the first time you are not fully governed by internal repetition. And that is where actual choice begins. And if you continue watching your inner voice without immediately obeying it, something subtle but powerful starts to shift in your behavior. You act more. You delay less. You recover faster. Not because fear disappears, but because fear loses final say. And in that shift, your life slowly stops being a reaction to internal history and starts becoming a response to present reality. And maybe that is the real question you were supposed to ask from the beginning. Not whether you are capable, not whether you are enough, but whether the voice guiding your hesitation deserves the authority you have been giving it. And if the answer is no, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What would your life look like if you stopped treating every thought in your head as a command? And you will not get that answer by thinking more. You will only get it by noticing what happens when you finally stop listening automatically.